If you ever hear someone pound on your front door at 2:13 in the morning and shout your full name like they own the ground under your house, do not assume they came with the truth. That was the first thought that cut through my sleep when the headlights swept across my bedroom wall and turned the cedar planks the color of old bone. A second later came the sound that told me this was no lost driver and no neighbor with bad news. Tires grinding over loose ranch gravel. Engine idling too hard. Car doors opening fast. Men trying to sound official. I rolled out of bed before the echo died, my bare feet hitting cold wood, and for half a second I just stood there listening to my own house breathe. The old vent above the hallway gave off that dry metal rattle it always made before dawn. The wind pressed once against the kitchen window. Then somebody outside slammed a fist against my front door and shouted, "Open up, Mr. Walker. HOA enforcement. HOA enforcement." At 2:13 in the morning. On a ranch sitting miles from anything that deserved the word enforcement. I reached for the lamp, but stopped and let the room stay dark. Outside, white beams kept cutting across the property in hard, nervous sweeps, flashing over the feed shed, the water trough, the split-rail fence I had rebuilt board by board the first summer I moved in. Diesel fumes slipped in through the cracked bedroom window, mixing with the smell of dust and the faint sweet scent of hay that always lingered in the walls. My blue heeler, Scout, was already at the end of the hall, low growl in his throat, every muscle locked toward the front of the house. He didn't bark much unless something was wrong. Tonight he sounded like a warning I should have listened to years earlier. I pulled on my jeans, grabbed the black thermal hanging off the chair, and moved to the side of the window where I could see the front drive without letting anyone see me. 3 men stood on my porch and front walk wearing dark tactical-style vests with cheap-looking patches that read HOA enforcement in white block letters. The letters were crooked. One of them had the patch peeling at the corner. Another was shining a flashlight into my front windows like he'd seen real lawmen do it on television and decided that was close enough. And parked behind them, just beyond the beam of the porch light, sat a pearl-white SUV I recognized before I even saw the woman step out of it. Melissa Hargrove, president of the Red Hollow Ridge Homeowners Association. Smile sharp as broken glass. Posture like the county had personally handed her every inch of authority in the state of Texas. Melissa had been after me from the week I bought the ranch. First it was letters about the fence line, then notices about the barn paint, then complaints about the truck I parked beside my own workshop on my own gravel. She liked rules the way some people like jewelry. Loud, shiny, and best used to make other people feel smaller. The problem for Melissa was that I read every bylaw she sent, every county code she misquoted, every threat tucked into her neat little envelopes, and every time I answered her with the one thing people like her hated most, patience. I never raised my voice, never gave her a scene at a board meeting, never handed her the angry ranch owner story she clearly wanted. I just documented, filed, responded, and kept living on my land. That had turned me from a nuisance into an obstacle. Outside, the tallest one on my porch banged the door again. "Mr. Walker, this is your final warning." Final warning. The words almost made me laugh, but there was something off in the rhythm of the night that kept the humor from reaching my face. Men pretending to be calm usually breathe too fast. Men pretending to have authority talk a little too loud. From where I stood, I could already see both. One guy kept adjusting his vest like it didn't fit right. Another had his flashlight in the wrong hand, sweeping it without purpose. And the paper in the leader's grip, the supposed warrant or citation or whatever costume piece they had printed out for this little performance, was folded wrong, waved too much, handled by someone who needed me to fear it before I had time to read it. That told me more than the patches did. My phone was on the dresser. I picked it up, opened the camera grid from the security system, and watched the ranch from 6 angles at once. Front, porch, north gate, feed shed, horse barn, driveway, back fence, clean picture, clear audio, timestamp in the upper corner. Then I opened one more app and let the recording roll. Scout pressed against my leg as another voice rose from the porch. This one soft and female, and somehow worse because it sounded pleased. "Ethan," Melissa called, dragging my name out like she'd been saving it. "You can make this easy, or you can make it expensive." I looked at her on the screen, standing under my porch light in a cream coat and polished boots that had probably never seen real mud in their lives, and I felt that old quiet part of me wake all the way up. Because people don't send fake officers to a man's ranch in the middle of the night over barn paint or fence posts. They do it when they want something badly enough to stop pretending. And in that moment, with diesel in the air, gravel still settling in the drive, and Melissa Hardgrove smiling like she had already won, I knew this wasn't about HOA rules anymore. It was about my land, and whatever she thought was buried inside it. I bought that ranch because I needed a place where the world made sense again. Out there, things answered to weather, water, and work. Fences leaned when the wind had been hard for too many seasons. Horses told you the truth before people did. If a pump failed, you fixed it. If a storm rolled in from the west, you saw it coming across the dark line of mesquite and had just enough time to cover what mattered. After years of living on schedules that belonged to other men, in places where every sound had to be measured and every silence meant something, I wanted land big enough for my thoughts to spread out and die off on their own. The ranch gave me that. 137 acres of dry Texas ground, a cedar-sided house with more history than polish, a horse barn that smelled like leather and old wood, and a north pasture that caught sunrise in a way that made even bad mornings feel honest. I put my money into water lines, fence posts, and roof repairs instead of anything fancy. My truck was 10 years old. My coffee was always too strong, and my favorite sound in the world became the slow metallic click of the front gate when I came home at dusk and knew nobody was waiting there to ask me for anything. That was before Melissa Hardgrove decided my piece was some kind of personal insult. She lived at the front of the subdivision in one of those oversized stone houses with uplighting on every tree and a flag that never had a crease in it. Red Hollow Ridge called itself a ranch community. But most of the people who moved in wanted the look of country life without any part of the actual work. They wanted decorative fences, not fence repairs. They wanted quiet evenings, as long as nobody nearby owned livestock, a diesel truck, or enough acreage to remind them they were still pretending. Melissa thrived in that kind of place. She had the smile of a woman who had never been told no in any way that lasted. The first letter she sent me came 3 weeks after closing. It said my exterior storage arrangement violated community aesthetics. What she meant was she could see feed barrels from the service road. The second said my barn lighting was excessive. The third objected to the color of a gate I had not changed. By month 3, she was citing sections of the bylaws that did not apply to agricultural parcels, and by month 4 I realized she was not confused. She was testing me. She expected me to ignore the notices, lose my temper at a board meeting, or pay a fine just to make her go away. I did none of those things. I answered every letter in writing. I highlighted county exemptions. I attached surveys, permits, and tax records. I kept copies in a file cabinet by the kitchen and digital copies on a hard drive in my office. It became a rhythm. Melissa threatened. I replied. She adjusted her story. I sent another document. The more polite I stayed, the more irritated she became. And there is nothing more dangerous than a person who mistakes patience for weakness. The ranch mattered to me in ways she would never understand. My father had not left me land or money. What he left was a habit of finishing what you start and taking care of the tools that take care of you. He could fix a hinge with baling, wire, and make an old tractor cough back to life with 2 wrenches and stubbornness alone. When I signed the papers on that property, it was the first thing in my life that felt fully mine, not issued. Not assigned, not temporary. I rebuilt the front fence the first summer with my own hands, 32 posts in heat that shimmered above the ground and turned the air silver by noon. I planted 2 live oaks by the house knowing I might be old before they cast real shade. I repaired the porch light, replaced the warped boards in the tack room, and painted the feed shed on a Sunday afternoon while Scout slept under the truck and country radio drifted from an open window. That place did not just hold my life. It helped me rebuild it, which is why, standing in the dark with my phone screen lighting half my face and Melissa on my porch acting like she had arrived to collect something already promised to her, I felt the shape of the night change. This was not another letter, not another hearing, not another neat envelope slid into my mailbox by a woman with too much time and too little conscience. This was escalation, deliberate, expensive, and timed for maximum pressure. The men outside were part of that. You do not stage a midnight visit with fake authority unless you believe daylight would expose you. I watched Melissa glance toward the north side of the property on the camera feed, just for a second, and that told me more than all her notices ever had. She was not looking at my house. She was looking past it, toward the back acreage, toward the strip of land that touched the old county easement and the dry creek bed beyond it. And right then I knew two things with absolute certainty. First, she had not come out here over a bylaw. Second, whatever she wanted from me had been planned long before those headlights hit my bedroom wall. Melissa had a way of turning ordinary community business into theater, and the more I think about that night, the more I realize she had been rehearsing it for months. Every letter, every inspection notice, every clipped little sentence at the quarterly board meetings had been a line in a script she thought would end with me folding. I met her in person for the first time at the mailbox cluster near the front entrance, about 6 weeks after I moved in. It was late afternoon, the kind of Texas heat that sticks to the back of your neck even when the sun starts dropping, and I was standing there with a stack of forwarded utility papers when she walked up in pressed white jeans and a sun hat that looked like it had never met actual weather. She smiled before she spoke, but it was the kind of smile that arrives first so the words can hide behind it. She welcomed me to Red Hollow Ridge, told me everybody out here believed in standards, then glanced at the dust on my boots and said she hoped I would not be one of those owners who confused land rights with personal freedom. I remember looking at her for a second longer than polite people usually do, not because I was angry, but because I was trying to decide whether she truly believed that sentence made sense. Then I told her I had read the bylaws, the county parcel map, and the agricultural exemption language attached to my deed. Her smile tightened right there at the edges. Some people hate being challenged. Melissa hated being answered. After that, the pattern settled in fast. A complaint about the horse trailer parked too close to my own barn. A complaint about exterior noise because one of the ranch hands helping a neighbor had run a generator after sunset half a mile away. A complaint about visual clutter because I stacked cedar posts near the tool shed before resetting a section of fence. None of it held up under county rules, but that did not seem to matter to her. The goal was never to win on paper. The goal was pressure. Death by paperwork. Irritation as strategy. She wanted me tired, distracted, and eventually willing to sign whatever would make her disappear. The board itself was mostly a collection of people who preferred comfort over principle. A retired dentist who nodded through every motion. A realtor who talked about preserving property values like he was reciting a prayer. A younger man named Bryce Tolland who never said much, but always watched the room when Melissa spoke, like he was measuring which way the air moved around power. At first I figured he was just another follower. Later I would learn he was the one who kept the development maps, contractor bids, and access proposals off the official record. But back then, all I knew was that every time Melissa pushed too hard, Bryce was somewhere nearby pretending not to notice. I went to exactly 2 HOA meetings in person. The first one taught me everything I needed to know. Melissa called my parcel a compliance concern in front of 30 people drinking bad coffee from paper cups. She used phrases like community harmony and long-term planning, while a slideshow behind her showed aerial images of the neighborhood. My property was outlined in red on one of those slides for less than 3 seconds before she clicked past it. Most people would not have caught it. I did. I also caught the fact that the image extended farther north than my survey packet had, all the way to the Dry Creek corridor that bordered the old county easement. When I asked why my land was featured in a planning presentation, Melissa gave me a polished answer about mapping consistency and moved on too quickly. After the meeting, a woman named Cheryl from the architectural committee stopped me in the parking lot and whispered that Melissa had been talking for weeks about cleaning up the outer parcels before expansion started. Expansion of what? Cheryl did not know, or did not want to say. That was the first time the word lodged in my mind. Expansion. Not maintenance. Not compliance. Expansion. From then on I started keeping closer track. I saved every envelope. I photographed every posted notice before removing it. I downloaded county hearing agendas and zoning updates. I even drove into town one Friday and pulled old plats from the recorder's office, standing under fluorescent lights that hummed like insects while a clerk with reading glasses slid oversized paper maps across the counter. Most of it looked ordinary until you compared dates. Road studies, drainage evaluations, preliminary utility discussions. Small things, scattered and boring on their own, but together they formed a shape. Something was moving toward Red Hollow Ridge from the commercial side of the county line, and my ranch sat in the one place that could complicate it. Back in the present, Watching Melissa on my porch through the glow of my phone screen, I felt all those months locked together with a clean, almost audible click. This was why she had never let go. This was why she kept reaching past reason and past policy into harassment, bluff, and now whatever this midnight performance was supposed to be. The men outside were not there because I broke a rule. They were there because I had become expensive to move the legal way. And when Melissa lifted her chin toward my dark front window and called my name again, softer this time, almost confident, I understood something that made the whole night colder than the air deserved. She thought she had finally found the hour when decent people stop thinking clearly. She just did not know that I had spent a large part of my life learning exactly how to think when everyone else was counting on panic. I set the phone face up on the hallway table where the microphone could catch everything and walked to the front door without turning on a single extra light. Scout stayed glued to my left leg, silent now, ears forward, reading the tension before I ever touched the lock. The pounding started again, harder this time, followed by the sharp beam of a flashlight cutting through the glass inset near the top of the door. "Mr. Walker, open this door immediately." The voice belonged to the tallest one, the man holding the paper. Up close through the glass, he looked to be somewhere in his 30s, broad shoulders, close-cropped hair, jaw set a little too rigidly for someone who wanted to project calm authority. His vest sat wrong on him, hanging more like a costume than equipment, and the badge clipped to the front caught the porch light with the dull shine of cheap metal. I unlocked the deadbolt but kept the chain set, opening the door only 3 inches. Cool night air slid into the house, carrying dust, diesel, and the faint smell of overheated brake pads. Melissa stood on the walkway behind him with her hands folded in front of her coat, chin lifted, eyes bright in a way that told me she had been waiting a long time for this moment. "Can I help you?" I asked. The tall man stepped forward and raised the folded document toward the opening. "We are here on behalf of Red Hollow Ridge Enforcement Authority to execute an emergency compliance action." His tone was practiced, but only in the way men practice lines they do not fully understand. He spoke too fast through the middle and stumbled slightly on the last 3 words. I looked at the paper and did not take it. "Emergency compliance action," I repeated. "At 2 in the morning. He tightened his grip on the document. "You have been issued multiple notices. You are in continued violation. We have authorization to inspect structures, secure restricted areas, and begin asset review." Asset review. That one almost made me smile. Nobody who had ever worked inside actual law enforcement would use a phrase that vague on a porch in the middle of the night unless they were hoping the target had no idea what real procedure sounded like. "Who signed it?" I asked. He blinked once. "Sir, the authorization." "Who signed it?" He turned the paper slightly, buying himself half a second. "The board." Behind him, one of the other men shifted his weight and flashed his light toward my truck, then toward the barn, then back at my windows, all of it nervous and sloppy. Melissa finally stepped closer, heels clicking on the flagstone I had laid the year before. "Ethan, do not do this the hard way," she said, as if we were discussing a catering dispute instead of 3 strangers outside my door before dawn. "You have delayed the association long enough." Delayed the association. Not violated the rules. Not endangered the neighborhood. Delayed. The word landed exactly where I knew it would. "Interesting choice of words," I said. The tall man cleared his throat and tried to recover the lead. "Sir, if you refuse cooperation, we are authorized to enter the property and document non-compliant areas from exterior access points." There it was again, almost correct, almost believable, but wrong in the bones. Real authority never has to explain itself that hard. Real authority names the statute, the office, the jurisdiction. It does not keep fishing around for phrases that sound expensive. I let my eyes move over each of them slowly, like I was still deciding whether to be intimidated. The shortest one had brand new tactical boots without a speck of ranch dust in the seams, which meant he had not been out of that vehicle long and probably was not used to wearing them. The second had a radio clipped to his vest, but there was no earpiece. No shoulder microphone wire, and when it crackled once I caught a burst of music before somebody turned the volume down. The tall one wore a sidearm holster on the wrong side for the hand he kept favoring. Not impossible, just careless. Every detail was a sentence, and together they formed the same message. "Pretend harder." "I need your names," I said. "Full names." Melissa gave a thin laugh. That is not how this works. It is on my porch. For the first time, the man holding the paper looked irritated instead of confident. Trent Delaney, he said. He gestured vaguely behind him. Marcus Flynn. Owen Pike. The names came too quickly for him to be checking whether he should share them, which told me they were either real and he thought I could do nothing with them, or fake and memorized because this little operation was supposed to last about 3 minutes. Either way, he was growing impatient, and impatient people make better mistakes. I let my gaze drop to the document again. Slide it through. He hesitated, then folded it smaller and pushed it into the gap. I took it with 2 fingers and held it under the hall light without opening the door any wider. One glance was enough. No county seal. No case number formatted the way this county used them. The address line had my parcel listed as Lot 14, which was the subdivision designation they kept trying to apply even though the deeded survey had superseded it years ago. At the bottom was a signature block labeled Community Action Division, a department that did not exist anywhere in Red Hollow Ridge or the county attached to it. I looked up at Trent and then passed him to Melissa, who was still smiling but no longer as easily. You drove out here in the middle of the night with a fake document, fake uniforms, and a story you barely memorized, I said. So let me save all of us some time. You are not here over a fence. You are here because something north of my house matters more to you than pretending this is about bylaws. For the first time since I opened the door, Melissa did not answer right away, and in the silence that followed, I heard something from the side of the property that turned the whole night 1 degree tighter. The metallic snap of a gate latch near the barn. The sound came again, cleaner this time, the unmistakable rattle of chain against metal from the side gate that opened toward the barn lane, and every loose thread in the scene suddenly pulled tight in the same direction. Trent heard it too. I saw it in the way his eyes flicked left before he could stop them. Melissa did not turn, but the corner of her mouth shifted just enough to tell me she had expected that sound and had been waiting for my reaction to it. That was the moment the whole performance changed shape. Up to then, they had wanted me focused on the porch, on the fake document, on the man in front of me using big, empty words to imitate authority. But the real move had always been somewhere else. Who is at my barn? I asked, keeping my voice flat. Trent squared his shoulders like that could patch the holes in the story. Sir, this is a coordinated property compliance review. That is not an answer. Melissa finally spoke, calm and polished, like she was explaining a scheduling issue at a luncheon. Your outbuildings and the north side of the parcel are part of the inspection scope. The north side. There it was again, no longer hidden. She had reached too far and knew it, but people like Melissa always believed confidence could outrun facts. I took 1 step back from the door, still holding it on the chain, and let my eyes move from her face to the security feed on my phone. Camera foreshowed the barn lane in grainy black and white. A shadow was moving near the side gate, low and quick, trying to stay outside the spill of the floodlight mounted above the tack room. Not one of the 3 on my porch. A 4th person. Quiet, deliberate, already past the point where any normal homeowner was supposed to keep up. Scout gave a low, sharp growl that vibrated through the wood floor. You brought more people than you announced, I said. Trent forced a humorless smile. Maybe if you had cooperated, this would have gone smoother. That told me 2 things. First, he knew exactly what I was talking about. Second, he had stopped pretending this was ordinary. I slid the fake paper onto the hall table without taking my eyes off them. You need to leave my property now. Melissa folded her arms. You do not get to make that call anymore. The line would have sounded strong to anyone who did not know how fear hides under arrogance. But I did. Her voice had gone too crisp, too carefully measured. She was not in control. She was trying to sound like she still was. I opened the camera app fully, tapped the audio boost, and angled the phone closer to the crack in the door. For the record, I said, you have identified yourselves as Trent Delaney, Marcus Flynn, and Owen Pike, acting under an authority that does not exist, using a false document, while at least 1 additional person is moving toward my barn without permission. Is that correct? The shortest man on the walkway muttered something under his breath. Trent shot him a look. Melissa stepped forward into the porch light, the cream of her coat going pale as paper. Ethan, stop trying to dramatize this. The association has broader access rights than you seem to understand. Then name the section. She paused. Tiny pause. Less than a second. Enough. You have delayed this community long enough, she said. There are projects underway that affect everyone here, and your refusal to cooperate does not give you the right to hold up progress. Progress. Another slip. Not aesthetics. Not compliance. Progress. I could almost feel the outline of the truth pressing through the lies now. Whatever sat beyond my north fence, whatever touched that dry creek and old county easement, it had become important enough for Melissa to trade paperwork for trespass and bluff. On the camera feed, the fourth figure reached the shadow of the hay shed and crouched near the utility box mounted on the post beside it. My stomach went cold, not from fear exactly, but from certainty. They were not just looking. They were trying to gain access or disable something. I drew in a slow breath and let it out through my nose. No rush. No panic. Everything on my ranch had a pattern. Gates. Cameras. Lights. Wells. Motion sensors. If someone wanted to move around in the dark out there, they were already inside a system they did not understand. Melissa, I said, and for the first time all night I used her first name the way she used mine. Stripped of courtesy and soft edges. Whatever you thought this would be, it is over. She gave me a small smile that did not reach her eyes. You still think this is about winning an argument? No, I said. I think it is about evidence. I tapped one button on the phone. Across the property, the floodlights over the barn lane snapped on all at once, washing the side yard, the feed shed, the fence line, and the crouched figure by the utility box in white light, so bright even Melissa flinched. On the porch, nobody spoke for half a heartbeat. Then from the yard came a startled voice I had never heard before, followed by the sound of boots on gravel and Scout surging forward hard enough to pull against my leg. And standing there in that sudden brightness, with every camera now holding a perfect view, I finally saw what they had been trying so desperately to reach before I noticed. What they had been trying to reach was not my barn door, not the feed room, and not the tack shed. It was the narrow post beside the utility box where I kept a weatherproof map tube bolted under the overhang, the kind of thing nobody noticed unless they already knew it mattered. The fourth man froze in the floodlights with one hand still half raised, caught between acting casual and admitting he had no business being there. He wore the same dark vest as the others, but his patch was upside down, and that one detail told me more than his face ever could. He had dressed in a hurry, probably in the dark, because the plan was supposed to end before anyone started paying attention to details. Step away from that post, I said. My voice came out calm enough that even Scout eased an inch, though the fur along his neck stayed high. On the porch, Melissa recovered first. She let out a breath through her nose, almost amused, then tilted her head like I was being unreasonable in my own doorway. You are making this far more dramatic than it needs to be, she said. That equipment is subject to review if it connects to shared development boundaries. Shared development boundaries. There it was again, another phrase that did not belong in a midnight compliance visit unless the truth was trying to leak. Out through bad lies. I looked from her to the man in the yard, and then back to the phone screen in my hand. Under the hard white wash of the floodlights, I could now see exactly where he had crouched. Not at the utility box itself, but lower, near the cedar post where an orange survey ribbon had been tied months ago, and then hidden behind a coil of spare hose. I had left it there after a county engineer came out in June to verify the old easement line by the dry creek. At the time, he had said the county was reviewing access routes for future drainage work and maybe a connector road if commercial zoning ever expanded east. He had sounded bored, the way government men sound when they are reading from a process bigger than themselves. I had filed the notes away and thought about them only twice since then. Melissa, apparently, had thought about little else. That is what this is about, I said, more to myself than to her. The easement. Trent shifted on the porch. Melissa did not answer. The silence did it for her. I opened the door another inch, chain still set, and the old hinge let out a low creak that sounded louder than it should have in the dark. You have been trying to pressure me off the ranch because the north strip touches the only clean access line to that creek corridor. Melissa lifted one shoulder in a gesture so slight most people would miss it. You are not the only property owner affected by growth. Growth, I said. That is the third different word you have used tonight for the same thing. Progress. Development. Growth. None of them appear anywhere in your fake order. One of the men on the walkway muttered, Melissa, we should go. She snapped him silent with a look sharp enough to cut glass. That was useful too. People do not panic about language unless the language matters. I thought back to the board meeting slide, the red outline around my parcel, Bryce sitting there pretending not to notice. Then another memory surfaced, small but suddenly bright. 2 weeks earlier, I had found fresh tire marks near the north fence after a dry spell, deep tread from a heavy vehicle that did not belong to me, my neighbors, or the county crews that usually announced themselves. At the time, I figured some subcontractor had turned around in the wrong place. Now it fit. They had already been testing approaches, measuring space, figuring out where a private lane could be widened into something permanent. My ranch was not the whole target. It was the hinge, the part they needed to make the rest of their plans work without paying the real price of doing it the legal way. The man in the yard took a cautious step back from the survey ribbon, raising both hands a little as if that could rewind the last 30 seconds. The floodlights flattened everything around him, every fence post shadow, every gravel edge, every lie. "Do not touch anything else," I said. He looked to Trent, not to Melissa, which told me Trent was the one running the field side of this circus. Trent clenched his jaw and finally dropped the official tone. This could have been handled quietly. That almost made me laugh. Quietly. Like months of harassment, forged paperwork, fake uniforms, and a fourth man sneaking toward my barn lane at 2 in the morning counted as quiet. "No," I said. "Quiet is what you were counting on from me." Melissa took one slow step closer to the door, and for the first time that night her smile was gone completely. The porch light showed the strain at the corners of her mouth, the tiny pulse beating in her neck, the first visible crack in all that polished certainty. "You are standing in the way of something bigger than this ranch," she said. "You can keep pretending this is personal, but by morning you are going to understand that the county is moving forward with or without your cooperation." I held her gaze and felt the last missing piece settle into place. This was not just her. She had allies. Money behind her. Maybe Bryce, maybe contractors, maybe somebody in county planning who liked backroom shortcuts better than public hearings. But if she thought saying that out loud would scare me, she had misread me from the start. Because when someone tells you they are part of something bigger, they are also telling you there are records, signatures, maps, emails, timelines, and people who think their names will stay buried. And standing there with the fake order on my hallway table, the survey ribbon glowing, orange in the floodlights, and Melissa Hargrove finally speaking like a woman who had run out of smaller lies, I realized the midnight raid was not the end of her plan. It was the first mistake big enough to expose all of it. There is a point in a bad situation when everything stops feeling like separate problems and becomes one clean pattern, and the second Melissa said county, I felt that pattern lock into place inside my head. The porch, the fake order, the upside-down patch on the fourth man, the orange survey ribbon by the barn lane, the board meeting slide, the tire tracks near the north fence, all of it connected now. People think composure is something you are born with, like eye color or height. It is not. It is repetition. It is training your mind to sort noise from signal until panic no longer gets first say. I had spent enough years in places where confusion could cost more than pride that I learned to trust the details before I trusted the volume of anybody's voice. That was why Melissa had always misread me. She thought quiet meant passive. She thought patience meant uncertain. She thought a man living alone on a ranch with a blue heeler and a 10-year-old truck was the kind of man you could box in with paperwork, late-night pressure, and a few hired bodies wearing fake authority. She had never understood that some men leave one life behind without ever losing the habits that kept them alive in it. I opened the door just enough to let the chain go slack, but I did not swing it wide. Scout stayed close, eyes fixed on the yard, every line of him alert and waiting on me. The night air felt colder now, sharper somehow, carrying cedar, dust, warm wiring from the floodlights, and the faint mineral smell that always rose from the creek bed before dawn. Trent looked at me like he was trying to decide whether to push harder or start backing out. Melissa looked at me like she still believed this could be bent back into her control if she said the right thing with enough confidence. "You should think very carefully about what happens next," she said. I nodded once. I already am. Then I set my phone on the narrow entry table so the camera faced the open door, and I stepped fully into the porch light. Melissa had seen me at meetings in work jeans and a jacket, had seen me loading feed, fixing fence, hauling lumber. She had seen the version of me built for peace, the one I chose for this place. What she had never seen was the moment that choice gave way to something older and far more precise. "My name is Ethan Walker," I said, not loudly, just clearly enough that every microphone on my system would catch it. "And before I ever bought this ranch, before you ever mailed me your first warning letter, I spent 12 years as a Navy SEAL." Nobody spoke for a second. The floodlights hummed. Somewhere in the pasture a horse shifted and snorted once, unsettled by the engines and voices. Trent's face changed first. Not fear exactly. Recognition. The fast, private kind men get when they suddenly understand the ground beneath a conversation is not what they thought it was. He glanced at my posture, my hands, the way I was standing in the doorway without crowding it, and I could almost see him replaying the last 10 minutes with new math. Melissa recovered slower. "That does not impress me," she said, but the line landed flat because she said it too late. "It was not meant to," I said. "It means I know the difference between lawful procedure and a costume. It means I know when somebody is creating a distraction on one axis while trying to gain access on another. It means I know you did not drive out here at 2 in the morning over aesthetics." The fourth man in the yard took another small step back from the survey marker. Marcus, or Owen, whichever one had the radio with music bleeding through it, looked at Trent for direction and got none. Good. Confusion spreads fastest in groups built on bluff. Melissa tried to straighten the scene with sheer force of will. "You are making a very serious mistake by obstructing this process." "No," I said. "The serious mistake was showing me the target." I pointed, not at her, but past her shoulder toward the dark line beyond the house and barn where the north acreage fell away toward the old easement. "That strip is the hinge point, is not it? Connector access, utility line, drainage corridor, maybe all. 3. You needed a clean approach, and my parcel stopped the route from making sense on paper. So you leaned on me with notices. When that failed, you came in person. When that failed, you brought fake enforcement. That means whatever is tied to that easement has a deadline." Melissa did not answer, and that was answer enough. In the stillness that followed, I heard something far off beyond the fence line, not loud, but distinct enough to matter. The low growl of a diesel engine idling where no vehicle should have been at this hour. Not on my drive. Beyond it. Near the north end. Additional company. Additional proof. I looked at Melissa and saw the first real crack in her expression. Not anger now, not even arrogance, but the thin bright strain of a person watching a hidden plan become visible one piece at a time. And standing there in the porch light with the whole ranch awake around me, I understood exactly why she had chosen tonight. Whatever was coming through that easement was already closer than I thought. The engine note beyond the north fence stayed low and steady, the kind of idling you hear when someone is waiting for a signal, and almost at the same moment the horses in the barn shifted hard enough for the metal panels to ring. That sound changed everything. Men in fake vests on my porch were one problem. Nervous horses, a hidden access line, and a second vehicle near the easement were another. Property can be replaced. Animals panic on their own clock. Once that starts, you do not get to argue your way back to calm. I reached past the doorframe and hit the control panel mounted just inside the entry. The house gave a soft confirming chime. A second later the north gate lock engaged with a heavy mechanical thunk. The drive camera switched to live upload, and the exterior speakers came online across the barn lane and creek approach. Trent heard it and took half a step toward the door. Scout moved with me, not aggressive, just certain, and that alone stopped Trent from pretending his next idea was a good one. "Do not," I said, and my voice came out so flat even Melissa paused. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked. Then another. My sister Ava was awake. She had been staying with me that week. In the guest room over the kitchen while contractors tore apart her place in town, and the second I realized she could hear all of this, the night narrowed into something even sharper. "Ava," I called without taking my eyes off the porch, "lock the hallway door and stay inside." Her answer came from above, tight but steady. "Ethan, there is a truck light out by the creek." Of course there was. Melissa glanced toward the north side again, just once, and that was enough. She had not expected another witness inside the house. She had not expected me to have someone upstairs watching a different angle. She had definitely not expected the ranch systems to lock down faster than her people could improvise. I tapped my phone screen and routed the north camera to full brightness. On the display, through mesquite shadows and floodlight spill, I caught the shape of a dark pickup sitting just outside my fence line near the old easement cut. No headlights, no markings, one amber work light, glowing dim above the cab. Beside it stood two men in reflective vests, not moving much, just watching. Surveyors, or contractors maybe. Except no legitimate crew in this county staged itself at nearly 3 in the morning behind a private ranch, while fake enforcement knocked on the front door. There it is, I said. Your progress. Melissa lifted her chin. You do not understand what you are looking at. No, I said. I understand exactly what I am looking at. What I want to know is whether the county understands you sent theater to open the gate before your real people rolled in. That hit. Not because she answered, but because Trent finally looked over his shoulder toward the north side like he had forgotten for 1 second that he was supposed to keep the bluff alive. That one movement told me the sequencing. The porch team distracted me. The barn lane man located the marker. The truck near the easement waited for access. Everything depended on confusion lasting just long enough to make first contact with the North Strip and claim there had been consent, inspection authority, emergency entry, whatever lie they planned to polish after sunrise. Over the speaker near the barn, my own recorded voice came on clear and level as I activated incident mode. This property is under video and audio recording. Unauthorized. Entry is being documented. Leave the premises immediately. The words carried farther than normal conversation, drifting over gravel, cedar, horse panels, and dry grass toward the creek bed. The two reflective vests by the truck turned their heads at the same time. Good. Let them know the dark was gone. One of the men on my porch muttered a curse under his breath, and Melissa rounded on him with a look that could have frozen water. Her control was fraying now, not all at once, but in tiny visible tears. The polished woman who loved letters and board motions was still there, but underneath her I could see the real thing at last. A person who had gambled on secrecy and suddenly found herself under lights she did not control. Then from the barn came a new sound, smaller than the engine, smaller than boots on gravel, but more urgent than either. One of the stall latches rattling from the inside, because the gelding in the end stall hated diesel fumes and raised voices. I knew that horse. Knew the exact way his ears pinned when he got anxious. Knew how fast anxiety could spread down a row of stalls. I did the math in a second. Porch. North fence. Barn. Ava upstairs. Too many moving parts for anyone else. Not for me. I looked at Melissa and saw she knew I was no longer standing there to debate. If anything happens to those horses because of this stunt, I said, every second of it goes into the record. Then I opened the door fully, stepped out into the porch light with Scout at my side, and started down the walkway toward the barn while the truck beyond the north fence killed its engine all at once, like whoever was out there had just realized the quiet part of the plan was over. The gravel felt colder through the soles of my boots than it should have, and every sound on the ranch had sharpened into something separate and useful by the time I reached the middle of the walkway. The horses were still shifting in the barn, metal latches ticking, hooves thudding once or twice against stall mats. Not panicked yet, but close enough that I could hear the edge in them. That edge mattered more than anything Melissa thought she was doing on my porch. Animals always know. When people bring the wrong kind of energy onto land. I kept moving, steady and direct, with Scout pacing tight to my knee, and I took my phone back into my hand long enough to trigger the next sequence. One swipe locked the outer cattle gate at the road. Another pushed the camera archive to cloud backup and mirrored the live feed to 2 separate drives, one in my office and one off-site. Then I opened the emergency contact thread I had built months earlier after Melissa escalated from nuisance to obsession. Sheriff Daniel Reeves. My attorney, Laura Benton. My neighbor Caleb Brooks. One message, no wasted words. Unauthorized entry in progress at my ranch. Fake HOA enforcement. Active trespass near north easement. Live feed attached. I hit send before I even reached the first fence post. Behind me, Melissa called my name like she expected the sound alone to stop me. It did not. Ethan, if you keep escalating this, you are going to regret it. I almost admired the nerve of that sentence. She and her people had arrived in the dark, dressed in borrowed authority, with at least one crew staged by the north line, and she still wanted to speak as if I was the one disturbing the peace. I turned just enough for the microphones to catch me clearly. The only thing escalating tonight is your liability. The barn lane opened up ahead of me in a hard wash of white from the floodlights. The fourth man had retreated 2 steps from the utility post, but he had not left, which told me somebody had convinced him the payoff was worth the risk. He kept looking toward the north fence like he was waiting for further instruction. That told me something else. The truck beyond the easement had not killed its engine because the plan was over. It had killed its engine because the people out there were listening. I reached the control box mounted on the cedar post and keyed in the perimeter routine. At once the side lane gates dropped their magnetic locks, the motion markers by the creek path armed themselves, and 2 additional spotlights snapped on farther north where the ground dipped toward the dry bed. On my screen the shadows along the easement collapsed, and the dark pickup outside the fence line became clearer. Dual rear wheels. Mud on the quarter panel. A contractor rack over the bed. Not county issue. Not utility issue. Private. Beside it, the 2 men in reflective vests started talking fast, their gestures clipped and agitated now that they could no longer pretend nobody saw them. "You are trapping the wrong people," Trent called from behind me. "No," I said without looking back. "I am documenting the right ones." Then I hit the exterior audio again, not the recorded warning this time, but the live microphone. My voice rolled across the barn lane and out toward the north fence, amplified just enough to carry. "To the men by the easement, this property line is on camera and your vehicle is visible. Leave now, or your plates and faces go in the county record before sunrise." One of them jerked his reflective vest straight and stepped behind the truck door, which was exactly the kind of guilty movement innocent workers never make. The fourth man, near the survey ribbon, finally understood the ground had shifted under him. He lifted both hands a little and said, "I am just here to check markers." "At 3 in the morning?" I asked. He had no answer for that. Scout let out one hard bark, not wild, not repeated, just enough to freeze the man where he stood. Behind me, I heard Ava open the upstairs window an inch. "Ethan," she called. "Caleb says he sees the lights from his place, and he is coming up the west side fence." Good. Caleb's property bordered mine by a little over half a mile of rough line and cedar breaks, and if he was awake enough to call, he was awake enough to witness. Melissa knew it too. I turned then and looked back toward the porch. The confidence she had worn all night was thinning by the second. Trent was no longer trying to sound official. Marcus and Owen had drifted apart from him, the first sign of a hired team deciding individually how much trouble they wanted their names attached to. Melissa stepped off the porch and onto the gravel in those polished boots, finally close enough that the ranch dust could touch her. "You think a few cameras make you safe," she said. "No," I told her. "I think the truth does." The wind shifted across the property right then, carrying mesquite, hay, and the faint hot smell of the truck by the easement as somebody turned the key again and failed to start it cleanly on the first try. Small mistakes. Bigger panic. Exactly what I wanted. I moved to the last camera pole near the barn corner and angled it manually toward the north strip, tightening the zoom until the orange survey ribbon, the utility post, the truck, and the men in reflective vests all sat inside one frame like pieces of evidence laid out on a table. Then I sent that image to the group thread too. A second later, my phone vibrated with the first reply of the night. 3 words from Sheriff Reeves that landed heavier than any threat Melissa had made. "On my way now." The gravel felt colder through the soles of my boots than it should have, and every sound on the ranch had sharpened into something separate and useful by the time I reached the middle of the walkway. The horses were still shifting in the barn, metal latches ticking, hooves thudding once or twice against stall mats. Not panicked yet, but close enough that I could hear the edge in them. That edge mattered more than anything Melissa thought she was doing on my porch. Animals always know when people bring the wrong kind of energy onto land. I kept moving, steady and direct, with Scout pacing tight to my knee, and I took my phone back into my hand long enough to trigger the next sequence. One swipe locked the outer cattle gate at the road. Another pushed the camera archive to cloud backup and mirrored the live feed to 2 separate drives, one in my office and one off-site. Then I opened the emergency contact thread I had built months earlier after Melissa escalated from nuisance to obsession. Sheriff Daniel Reeves. My attorney, Laura Benton. My neighbor Caleb Brooks. One message, no wasted words. Unauthorized entry in progress at my ranch. Fake HOA enforcement. Active trespass near north easement. Live feed attached. I hit send before I even reached the first fence post. Behind me, Melissa called my name like she expected the sound alone to stop me. It did not. Ethan, if you keep escalating this, you are going to regret it. I almost admired the nerve of that sentence. She and her people had arrived in the dark, dressed in borrowed authority, with at least one crew staged by the North Line, and she still wanted to speak as if I was the one disturbing the peace. I turned just enough for the microphones to catch me clearly. The only thing escalating tonight is your liability. The barn lane opened up ahead of me in a hard wash of white from the floodlights. The fourth man had retreated 2 steps from the utility post, but he had not left, which told me somebody had convinced him the payoff was worth the risk. He kept looking toward the north fence like he was waiting for further instruction. That told me something else. The truck beyond the easement had not killed its engine because the plan was over. It had killed its engine because the people out there were listening. I reached the control box mounted on the cedar post and keyed in the perimeter routine. At once the side lane gates dropped their magnetic locks, the motion markers by the creek path armed themselves, and 2 additional spotlights snapped on farther north where the ground dipped toward the dry bed. On my screen the shadows along the easement collapsed, and the dark pickup outside the fence line became clearer. Dual rear wheels. Mud on the quarter panel. A contractor rack over the bed. Not county issue. Not utility issue. Private. Beside it, the 2 men in reflective vests started talking fast, their gestures clipped and agitated now that they could no longer pretend nobody saw them. You are trapping the wrong people, Trent called from behind me. No, I said without looking back. I am documenting the right ones. Then I hit the exterior audio again, not the recorded warning this time, but the live microphone. My voice rolled across the barn lane and out toward the north fence, amplified just enough to carry. To the men by the easement, this property line is on camera and your vehicle is visible. Leave now, or your plates and faces go in the county record before sunrise. One of them jerked his reflective vest straight and stepped behind the truck door, which was exactly the kind of guilty movement innocent workers never make. The fourth man near the survey ribbon finally understood the ground had shifted under him. He lifted both hands a little and said, I am just here to check markers. At 3 a.m? I asked. He had no answer for that. Scout let out one hard bark, not wild, not repeated, just enough to freeze the man where he stood. Behind me, I heard Ava open the upstairs window an inch. Ethan, she called. Caleb says he sees the lights from his place, and he is coming up the west side fence. Good. Caleb's property bordered mine by a little over half a mile of rough line and cedar breaks, and if he was awake enough to call, he was awake enough to witness. Melissa knew it too. I turned then and looked back toward the porch. The confidence she had worn all night was thinning by the second. Trent was no longer trying to sound official. Marcus and Owen had drifted apart from him, the first sign of a hired team deciding individually how much trouble they wanted their names attached to. Melissa stepped off the porch and onto the gravel in those polished boots, finally close enough that the ranch dust could touch her. You think a few cameras make you safe, she said. No, I told her. I think the truth does. The wind shifted across the property right then, carrying mesquite, hay, and the faint hot smell of the truck by the easement as somebody turned the key again and failed to start it cleanly on the first try. Small mistakes. Bigger panic. Exactly what I wanted. I moved to the last camera pole near the barn corner and angled it manually toward the north strip, tightening the zoom until the orange survey ribbon, the utility post, the truck, and the men in reflective vests all sat inside one frame like pieces of evidence laid out on a table. Then I sent that image to the group thread too. A second later, my phone vibrated with the first reply of the night. 3 words from Sheriff Reeves that landed heavier than any threat Melissa had made. On my way now. By the time Sheriff Daniel Reeves turned onto my driveway, the whole ranch looked less like a midnight bluff and more like a crime scene lit by its own mistakes. Caleb had already come up along the west fence in his work jacket and ball cap, breathing hard from the fast walk, carrying the rolled county map tube I had asked him to grab from his truck after he remembered what he had seen at a zoning hearing 2 months earlier. We had spread that map across the hood of my pickup under the barn light, while Melissa pretended not to recognize the red route line cutting straight toward the old creek easement. Caleb pointed to the markings with one rough finger and read the labels out loud so every camera and microphone on my property could catch them clean. Temporary access corridor. Utility staging lane. Phase 1 drainage alignment. And right where the line tightened against the edge of Red Hollow Ridge, there was my north strip, the exact piece Melissa had been trying to pressure me off for months. She said the map was preliminary. Caleb said that was funny, because Bryce Tolland had told 2 contractors at the diner in town that the route was already priced if the holdout parcel got cleared. She called him a liar. He pulled out his phone and played a recording of Bryce talking too loosely over coffee about how one stubborn ranch owner was about to learn what community planning really meant. That was the moment the last of the polish came off her. She stopped sounding offended and started sounding cornered. So when Reeves arrived with his light bar washing blue and white across the gravel and cedar posts, he did not step into confusion. He stepped into a fully assembled story with witnesses, recordings, fake documents, private contractors by the easement, and a woman in a cream coat standing on my property, trying very hard not to look like the center of it. Reeves got out of his cruiser slow and steady, same way he always moved in town, like he had learned a long time ago that rushing only helped liars shape the room before facts could settle. He was broad through the shoulders, silver at the temples, and dressed in the kind of real authority that never needed to announce itself. He took one look at the men in tactical vests, one look at the truck near the north fence, and one look at me standing by the barn with the county map on my hood, and I watched him sort the entire scene before he said a word. "Ethan," he said first, because that was deliberate. "Ground the truth in the owner before the performance can reclaim the stage." "Sheriff." I handed him my phone with the live feed still running and the message thread showing timestamps, images, and his own reply. Then I gave him the folded paper Trent had tried to serve at my door. Reeves read the top half, snorted once through his nose, and held it up under the barn light. "Community Action Division," he said. "That is creative." Trent opened his mouth and shut it again. Melissa stepped forward with her voice back in place, smoother now, legal sounding, the tone people use when they believe language can outrun evidence. She said this was an association enforcement visit supported by board authority and development coordination. She said there had been misunderstandings. She said the men on my property were private security contractors engaged for a site review tied to broader county interests. Reeves listened without interrupting, which in some people might have looked like patience. I knew better. He was letting her build the rope to exactly the length she wanted. When she finished, he asked one question. "Do you have any county order authorizing entry onto this ranch tonight?" Melissa hesitated. Tiny pause. "Same one she gave me on the porch. Not a county order in that exact form," she said. Reeves nodded like she had just filed her own statement into evidence. Then he turned to the reflective vests at the fence and asked which firm had sent them. One said he was subcontracted. The other said he was told this was approved access. Reeves asked approved by whom. Neither answered. He asked Trent for identification and employer information. Trent gave him a wallet card from a private patrol company 3 counties over. Nothing resembling law enforcement. Nothing authorizing impersonation. Nothing permitting entry under a false enforcement label. Reeves did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He simply began naming things in the calm, exact order that makes bad nights irreversible. Criminal trespass. False representation of authority. Forged or misleading service documents. Coordinated unlawful entry tied to a private development interest. Every word hit Melissa harder than shouting would have. Behind me, my phone buzzed again. Laura Benton had joined the live thread and sent one line that made me almost smile. "Keep recording. Do not explain more than they ask." Reeves looked over the map on my truck, listened to Caleb explain the hearing, and then asked me the cleanest question of the night. "Did you authorize any of these people to enter your porch, barn lane, or north boundary access?" "No," I said. "Not once." He nodded, turned back to Melissa, and for the first time all night, I saw her understand something simple and devastating. This was no longer a private pressure campaign hidden behind board letters and late-night intimidation. Under the barn lights, with witnesses on both sides of the fence and county records spread across my hood, her little empire had just become official evidence. Once Sheriff Reeves had the shape of it, the night started collapsing in on Melissa from every direction at once. He did not dramatize anything. He did not need to. Real consequences arrive quieter than threats. He asked Trent, Marcus, Owen, and the 4th man by the utility post to step apart from one another and keep their hands visible while Deputy Lino Ortiz, who had come in behind him without fanfare, began taking names, photographing badges, and collecting every piece of paper they had brought onto my property. Under the barn lights, those fake patches looked even cheaper than they had on my porch, stitched crooked, glued in places, built for distance and darkness instead of scrutiny. Reeves laid the false order on the hood of my truck beside Caleb's county plat and said, almost casually, "Interesting how your emergency compliance action lines up exactly with a preferred access corridor." Melissa tried one last time to lift the whole thing back into the language she trusted. She said this was a misunderstanding between association enforcement and preliminary planning. She said no one intended harm. She said the men had only entered because they believed they had authorization tied to a community interest. Reeves listened, then asked the question that ended her. If this was legitimate, why did you come before sunrise with private contractors staged at the easement and false identification at the front door? She had no clean answer for that, and everybody on the property knew it. Ava came down from the house then, pale from being woken up but steady, wearing a ranch jacket over her sleep shirt and carrying the black file box I kept beside the kitchen cabinet. She had already guessed what I needed before I asked. Inside that box were months of Melissa's letters, hearing notices, violation claims, envelopes, and printed email responses, each one dated, tabbed, and matched to the section of county code or deed language that contradicted it. I set the box on the truck hood beside the map, opened it under the light, and suddenly the whole campaign stretched out in physical form. There was the complaint about visual clutter that cited the wrong parcel designation. There was the warning about exterior use restrictions on agricultural land. There was the notice about unauthorized structures sent 2 days after a drainage survey crew had first been spotted near the creek. Plant after plant, lie after lie. Reeves flipped through them with the kind of expression men wear when they stop looking for mistakes and start counting intent. Caleb pointed to 3 letters mailed within 48 hours of separate county planning discussions. Laura Benton stayed on speaker through my phone, calm and exact, asking Reeves to note preservation of all digital evidence and requesting the names of every contractor on site. Deputy Ortiz walked to the north fence with a flashlight and read off the pickup plate near the easement while Reeves radioed it in. Not county, not utility. Registered to a private subcontractor tied to Hollow Creek Civil. That was the second door closing. The first had been the fake order. The second was the truck. The third came when one of the reflective vest men, maybe tired, maybe scared, maybe just realizing Melissa was not worth the trouble, admitted he had been told the owner was already on board and that tonight was only meant to secure the route marker before filings went public. Melissa spun toward him so fast the gravel slipped under her polished boots. And for one ridiculous second, she looked less like a president of anything and more like a woman furious that the help had started speaking plain English. Reeves did not react outwardly, but I saw his eyes narrow. He asked the man to repeat himself, and this time Deputy Ortiz recorded it. That was enough. The rest happened with the inevitability of a gate swinging shut once gravity takes over. Reeves informed Trent and the others that they were being detained pending charges related to trespass, false representation, and document fraud. He told the contractor crew they were no longer free to leave until statements were taken. He told Melissa she was to surrender her phone and remain on site while county investigators were notified about potential evidence tied to development interference and attempted coercion of a landowner. She stared at him like she could still force the room back into her shape by refusing to believe it. "You cannot do this over an HOA dispute," she said. Reeves looked at the fake patches, the forged paper, the truck at the fence, the highlighted county route on my hood, and the file box full of letters she had spent months sending me. "Ma'am," he said, "this stopped being an HOA dispute the minute you tried to turn private pressure into false authority." That word ma'am hit harder than if he had raised his voice, because it stripped her of title and left only accountability behind. The blue and red lights kept turning over the barn walls, the porch posts, the cedar fence, painting the whole ranch in slow pulses while dawn still waited below the horizon. One by one, the details she thought would stay hidden became official. The upside-down patch, the false division name, the stage truck, the survey ribbon, the email about direct contact, the preliminary route packet with Bryce's initials. Even the old letters she had mailed me in crisp envelopes came back now as proof that tonight had not been a lapse in judgment. It had been a plan. And as Deputy Ortiz carried the fake documents to her cruiser, and Reeves began reading names into his recorder beneath the hard white floodlights of my barn lane, Melissa finally looked across my property not like she owned it, not like she could pressure it, but like she was seeing it for the first time as the place where her whole scheme had come apart. By the time the first real light of morning reached the top rail of the north fence, the whole ranch had changed its shape again. What had been glare and engines and too many voices in the dark turned into something cleaner under dawn, something smaller and more honest. The floodlights clicked off one by one as the sky went from black to deep blue to the pale gray that always comes just before sunrise in Texas. The horses settled first. I heard it in the barn before I saw it, the slower shifting of hooves, the steady rustle of hay, the soft exhale of animals deciding the worst of the night had passed. Scout finally stopped standing like a drawn wire and sat beside my boot, still alert, but no longer braced for the next wrong sound. Out by the driveway, Deputy Ortiz finished her notes while Sheriff Reeves spoke with the county investigator now patched into the call line Laura Benton had opened from her office. Caleb leaned against the hood of his truck with a paper cup of coffee Ava had poured for him from the kitchen, and every so often he looked toward the North Strip like he still could not quite believe how close they had come to turning a hidden route into a permanent scar across my land. Melissa stood near the porch where this whole thing had started, no longer framed like a queen in my light, no longer speaking in polished sentences about harmony and compliance and community standards. In daylight her coat just looked expensive and out of place. Her boots were dusted over. Her hair had loosened in the wind. The confidence she had worn all night had not survived the sunrise. There is something about mourning that strips drama down to facts. Under daylight, the fake patches looked cheaper. The forged paper looked thinner. The men she brought looked less like authority and more like exactly what they were, hired pieces in a plan that depended on darkness, speed, and my silence. Reeves came back from his cruiser holding a fresh incident number, a copy of the preliminary seizure log for the false documents, and a face that told me the next stage would happen far from my porch and far beyond Melissa's control. He said the county planning office would be getting a visit that morning. He said Bryce Tollin's name had already come up twice on recorded statements. He said Hollow Creek Civil was going to have a long day. Then he looked at me and said the words I had known were coming, but still felt in my chest when I heard them. You did the right thing by slowing it down. That was the whole difference. Melissa built her power on pressure, on creating enough urgency that people forgot to think. But pressure only works if the other person accepts your clock. I never did. That ranch taught me that all over again. Land has its own pace. Fences get set one post at a time. Storms build miles. Away before they ever touch your roof. Truth works like that too. Slow, until it is not. Ava came out onto the porch wrapped in a canvas jacket, hair pulled back, mug in both hands, and stood beside me without saying much. She had seen enough that night to understand the important part without explanation. After a minute she looked over the pasture, then at the North Strip, then back toward the house. They really thought you would panic, she said. I looked at the driveway where Reeves was finishing paperwork beside the cruiser, at Caleb talking quietly with Ortiz, at the barn lane where the orange survey ribbon still hung by the post like the world's dumbest confession, and I said, they thought quiet meant alone. That was the part people like Melissa never understand. Some of us get quieter after hard years not because we have less strength, but because we finally learn where strength belongs. Not in shouting, not in performative threats, not in proving something to fools at midnight. Strength is keeping records when someone wants chaos. It is reading the map before you step on the ground. It is letting liars speak long enough for their own words to become evidence. Later that morning, after the last cruiser pulled away and the contractor truck was finally escorted off the easement road, I walked the North Strip by myself. The sun was up then, laying a thin gold line across the dry creek bed and turning every strand of winter grass silver at the edges. I stopped at the cedar post by the utility box where the weatherproof tube was bolted under the overhang. The survey ribbon still fluttered there, bright orange against the wood, the tiny flag Melissa's people thought they could reach before I noticed. I untied it slowly and held it in my hand for a second, listening to the wind move through the mesquite and the far soft clang of a horse nudging a stall door for breakfast. Then I folded the ribbon and put it in my pocket. Not as a trophy, as a reminder. The same woman who mailed me neat little warnings about visual clutter had nearly handed me the evidence that destroyed her because she could not imagine a man like me would understand what she was really after. She thought she was dealing with acreage, paperwork, and inconvenience. She never realized she was dealing with memory, patience, and a man who had already spent years learning that the most dangerous thing you can do to yourself is mistake calm for surrender. When I reached the gate at the end of the lane, I put my hand on the cold steel latch and listened to it settle into place with that solid metallic click I have loved since the day I bought the ranch. Home, still mine. And out there beyond the fence line, where Melissa once saw a corridor and a shortcut and a way to move me quietly off the map, the morning spread over every acre she failed to take.